What's going on, guys? Today we have a very large 3D printed project. You might have noticed it in the last video of the garage tour. It's the Fierce Deity sword from The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. This is a 6-part print, and it was joined with epoxy at the joints, just like the Hylian shield and the Master Sword videos I did. This is like in length, it's the largest 3D printed project I've done on the channel, but by mass it probably still belongs to the Hylian shield. But one thing that I used this time that I didn't use on the other ones is I used automotive Bondo on the joints where I needed to make it look flush. So I've already done a test sand to make sure that it was going to work, and it's sanding really smoothly, so I think that's going to work great. So we're going to just run over this with a sander, get it nice and smooth, and then I'm going with these acrylic paints here. We went with Bahama Blue and Bright Green from Apple Barrel. We went with gloss. So hopefully that'll be the only paint that we have to use. I'm not planning on putting any lacquer or clear coat on it, because last time on the Hylian shield when I used clear coat and lacquer, it reacted with some of the paint and made it really bubbly, and I don't really want any texture on this except for just like smooth glossiness. So this sword, one side is like the DNA strand design will be the lime green or the bright green, and then one side will be the Bahama Blue. This threshold on the top of the this base here, the top of it is blue, and then this under part here is green along with the handle is green. So it's just a 2-color project, pretty simple. So let's get right in with the sanding and go from there. Alright guys, so we're using a power sander here and 80 grit sandpaper, a fresh sheet of that put on there, and wearing a respirator because you don't want to breathe anything like powdered plastic or metal, so it's always good to protect your lungs. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on sanding this area here, trying to make it flat like the rest of it and see how that goes. Okay, so you can see here that the plastic begins to show on the seams, and that's because the base of the prints were here for the blue. And on the base, when it begins to print, there's a little squish out on the first couple layers normally. And if you glue it without sanding those off first like I did, you'll end up with a little high spot. So that's why that line is starting to show right there. But basically what I do when I'm joining two pieces, if I can feel a difference, you're going to see the difference when you paint it. Especially using gloss, it's going to catch the light. You're going to see it immediately. So we're going to try to keep sanding this down. We're going to have some of these striation lines. This was not printed on a really high definition. I think this was on 0.2 layer height on this whole piece here, but we're just going to keep sanding and see where it goes. It'll take some time to get it all flat and perfect, but that's basically what we're going to do for all of these joints, and we have to do it on both sides. Also to mention, this seam here looks like a different substance because it is. This is JB Weld plastic weld that I was experimenting with because I'd never used it, so I wanted to see how it would work. And so far, like
rubbing it with my fingernail, it feels a little bit bouncy, like almost like it has air pockets. So I don't know how that's going to end up. We may end up having to snap it back off, sand it, and join it with something else. But we'll see how that goes. Okay, so this stuff right here is a lot harder to sand than Bondo. So I'll probably just use epoxy and do the Bondo for smoothing from now on. Because what happens when you have an adhesive that is harder than the material that you're adhering, that you're gluing together, when you attempt to sand it, you end up taking away too much of your base material because the glue itself is harder. So it's going to be a little difficult to get this sanded just right. Going to have to take my time with it and not get this too hot or too sanded down here or here. But we should be able to still make it work. It's putting a dent in it. Alright, so right here we had some epoxy squish out that I just sanded down, and right here is some that I haven't sanded yet, so that was from the initial joining when I had them all clamped together, and we were able to get most of this smoothed out to a point where I can get along with it. If I ever say my work is perfect, you guys correct me in the comments, because it never really is, but this is proving to be a challenge. It was much harder than the plastic itself, the adhesive is, so I can sand it, and it's just like taking more material off over here, but I'm still working with it. I'm going to try to maybe hit it at a lower speed and just take my time with it here. But that's basically one side, and then here's before with, you know, all the roughness there, and then that's what we're looking for. Smooth to where you can't feel anything, any difference. Now the insides of the blade here, they're going to have some jaggedy parts. I'm going to have to get that with by hand with some sandpaper after this. But so we're going to try to sand some of this epoxy off and maybe level out the handle up here a little better. We had a layer shift up here on the handle, I remember. This has actually been printed in pieces and sitting around the house for several months. But anyways, if I remember correctly, this layer shifted forward, and I had to kind of sand it down there, and you can see part of the layer is chipped out, but it's just on the handle part. I'm going to sand it the best I can here and just paint over it. It should look fine, but some more sanding to do. So a couple things to mention about this is when you are sanding PLA plastic or 3D printed plastic, and you've done it in a way where it has where it's hollow in the middle, you can only sand it so far, and you start seeing the layers flaking out. So that's what's kind of happening here. And if I keep going with this, it's going to get worse and worse. So I could smooth that out, but it's not really that big of a problem because it's all the way back here on the handle. So it's not that big of a deal to me. But another thing, when using power tools on fragile things like PLA plastic, it moves so quickly that it will melt the plastic while you're sanding it. So you kind of have to hit an area and give it a second and keep hitting it after that. If you just hold it down on there just for a long time sanding the same spot, it will begin to get soft and melt on you, and then that's catastrophic. It'll ruin your project. So just a couple things to mention, and also around the edges, if you're sanding, it will cause a burr, like here. It will cause burrs, which I have to then go back and file them off. So just to be aware of that. But the Bondo sanded very well, smooth, and I have to come back in here and hand sand the insides of the blade out in some spots. So the plastic adhesive completely sanded away, so there's nothing left but what's holding it together in the center. So that's kind of what it was before. So I just have this little bit here left, and then we'll move on to some hand sanding and then painting it. Oh, that's not a good sound. Alright, so the sanding is done, and I even sanded the parts of the sword that didn't have adhesive or Bondo on it, just so it would be roughed up enough for the paint to have something to stick to. So I've blown it off with some compressed air, and now I'm just wiping it down with a wet cloth to remove any particulates that would keep the paint from sticking. And we're going to allow this to dry after I do this for a few minutes, and it will be ready for paint. But you can see where the Bondo still is. Those were low spots that the Bondo filled in to make it look more smooth. So wherever the Bondo remained is where it needed to be filled in. So, and this here was a specific challenge, and basically I just had to take the sander, and on each plane I had to kind of sand
and then switch planes, sand all the way to the cross section, switch planes again. I never wanted to sand this ridge and get rid of that definition. So as long as you stay flat on the planes when you're doing any kind of like angled work like this, you want to do one plane at a time. Alright, so we got the green, that we're going to do all the green parts first, and then we'll come back and do the blue parts, and it'll probably have to be multiple coats. So now's the painstaking job of doing it all by hand, because I couldn't find the spray paint in the right colors. So let's see how this is going to cover. Not too bad. It's definitely going to need more coats though. But like I mentioned, the striation marks are definitely going to be visible. But it's uniform, so it should look pretty cool. Like the material it's made out of. If I get a little overspill on the other side, I can just come back and cover it with the blue. Not trying to be super neat right now, just kind of globbing it on to get it to cover. And we'll fix any problems when we layer on the blue. Alright, so we have all the green on the sword covered, the first coat, and more than likely it's going to take 2 or even 3 coats because it's a lighter shade of green and it's going on top of darker colors, so you'll have that. It's always easier to cover a lighter color with a darker colored paint. But after this coat dries, we're going to do the second coat, see how that looks. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that'll cover it pretty good. As you could probably tell, it's a different day and we're picking back up on our sword project. So we're going to do a second coat on the green and then we'll go to the blue. Alright, so the second coat's going pretty good, and as I'm putting it on here, you can see that the fresh paint is lighter than the paint that has already dried, and that's good because I can tell exactly where I need to still cover. But it's looking like to me that 2 coats is going to wrap it up. I'll stand back and look at it after this whole thing is done with 2 coats here, but I think 2 coats is all it's going to take, and then we can let it dry and move on to the blue. Just about finished. I'm pretty convinced that the 2 coats are going to be good once it dries. The tricky part is going to be the next part with putting the blue on, because we'll have to like be very clear and neat with our lines where the colors meet. So this was kind of the easy part. On to the blue. The Bahama blue. Alright. I guess it wouldn't make much sense to start in the middle, would it? Alright, pressure's on. I'm gonna come back and get really close and do the line like last. For right now, I'm just gonna see how it's gonna cover. Yeah, we're looking at several coats again, I'd say. This paint has like a different consistency than the green had. It's a little bit more like stringy. Like when I pull my brush out, it's kind of like yeah, this is gonna maybe even need 3 coats on the blue because it's so light.
Now remember here I'm aiming for where the planes meet, not the edge of the green, because some of this has been over painted. So as you can tell, there's a lot of little flaws and artifacts on this. I could have made those disappear by using some XTC 3D. It's like a epoxy plastic, but it coats the project and it hides the little texture. I don't think I used it. I think I used the Famo wood epoxy that's for like countertops on the shield. But anyways, I have some of that XTC 3D, but I didn't want to use it all up on this like very large sword. And this is just going to be hanging in my garage. I didn't want to waste a bunch of materials on it, you know, and try to make it look completely flawless. But that is one thing I could have done to make it come out a little better, and I could have also just spray painted the entire thing with some gray primer, and I probably would have had better coverage with this painting on top of the primer instead of covering the plastic and having to put multiple coats on. So, but I just wanted to make this a quicker kind of paint job because it's not, you know, something that's getting put into the house or anything. It's just going to be hanging out here in the garage looking cool from a distance on the wall, so I wasn't super worried about little tiny details. I just wanted to match the colors. It covers on the red like very poorly, so this the red parts are definitely going to need at least 2 coats on them, probably 3.
do. Whew, not that much. I didn't know I was digging this into your leg.
It's all good.
Okay, there's a pretty good example of what it's going to look like with the colors there, the pattern we're going with. The blue still needs probably another coat would be enough, maybe 2 more coats. We're going to see about that when it dries. So other than that, it should be done after the next coat. So we're going to let this dry. I might hit it with the heat gun to speed up the drying process and see how that covers. Alright, so it's mostly looking dry, so we're going to go ahead and try to put the second coat on and see how that looks. So let's see here how it's going to cover on top of the first coat. It's looking pretty good on the green plastic and the blue plastic here, but the red is what we're going to have to deal with, that it wasn't agreeing with a little bit ago. So we'll keep putting this second coat on and see what it looks like when we get to the red. So the blade looks like it only needed 2 coats, but this big red plastic base here, it just doesn't want to cover as good down here where it's such a large area. So I'm probably going to have to come back and do a 3rd coat on this base here, this blue part here. But it's covering pretty well. That last 3rd coat on the base and it should be done. I've just done the top of the blade here so far. I still have to get the bottom of this side and then the entire other side. I also have to go back in and cover up these spots that I've made on the green paint with a little touch up of the green after I'm done with the coats. And this paint is a little tricky too, because it's like it almost fools you on how well it's going to cover, and when it begins to dry you can start seeing the streaks. So I may have to do 3 coats on all of the blue, not just on the base, like the base and the blade. So we'll see if it needs it or not. But it's looking pretty good. The colors are coming together. I think we color matched it pretty accurately. When we finish it up here, we'll get some measurements and see just how wide and long this thing is, so we can stack it against our future prints.
Alright guys, so this is 2 coats of the green and 2 coats of the blue. The blue is a little shiny right now because it's not quite dry. I'm going to have to go through on some parts on the base here with a 3rd coat, and some of the red plastic is still kind of shining through the paint. The blue had a really hard time covering the red plastic. It's just certain colors like that tend to, you know, not want to cover as well when they're being put on certain other colors. But just a little more work left. I'm going to hit this with the heat gun and get it dried, and go back and put some more paint down here. Touch up a few of these little spots with the green paint that I touched over with some blue around the base of the blade right there. I've got some blue on the green. Some little detail work like that, and it should be done. I've got it this far away because, you know, we're dealing with PLA and it's got a fairly low melting point where it starts getting bendy and soft again. So you really don't want to get up close or you'll, you know, bow your project or make it like droop or something. So I'm staying back here. I kind of test it with my hand to see where the warmth point it ends and starts getting too cold. And I'm trying to just get the paint dry without doing any kind of damage. Alright, doing the 3rd coat on some problem areas. Probably 70% of the blue still needed another coat, so we're putting one on it. And then some touch-ups on the green, and it should be finished. It's covering really well so far on the 3rd coat. This should definitely be all it needs. This is the last coat, so I'm trying to like feather out the paint stroke marks so they won't be noticeable after the last dry. Alright guys, there it is with the 3rd coat of blue on there, and it's finished. So we're going to get some measurements here. It is 9 inches, 9 3/4 inches wide at the widest point of, like, I guess this would be the guard. And then from the end of the handle, to the tip, 47.5 inches. That is a 1/2 inch shy of 4 feet.
So this is how big it is. It's pretty huge. In the game, it's a double-handed sword. So it's pretty much, you know, life size. But yep, the longest 3D print that I've done so far. The Fierce Deity sword from Majora's Mask.